Hi, I'm Joseph Huberman, VP for Club Services, and I would like to welcome you to OUSA's monthly forum. Alison Campbell is going to present a program on sprints. During the presentation, you can put questions in the chat. After the presentation, we will have time for you to ask questions. So if you want to speak, please raise your hand and keep your microphone off until you're called on. The program is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera and mic or leave the meeting. And as I said before, for those of you late entries, the presentations have a lot of detail, so you should change your settings to the following settings in Meet. Click the three dots at the bottom, select Layout and change it to Spotlight. Select the three dots again, and then select Full Screen. Also hide messages unless you need them. She's got a lot of nice maps in the program, and now I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Joe. Right, let me now figure out how to present my screen again. Entire screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, you got it.
Perfect. Okay, sorry, I use Teams more than Google Chat. So, hi, my name is Alison Campbell. I am on the senior US orienteering team, and we had the lovely request from some of the juniors to discuss sprint orienteering. So it's nice to see in the chat coming in that there's a wide range of sprint experience from some world champions attendees and down to beginners. So hopefully we can cover through kind of what sprint orienteering is, how it's kind of differed around the world, and then my tips on how to train for sprints. So, yep, we'll look at what sprint orienteering is, what the different disciplines are, because there are more than one, what skills and techniques are kind of important for sprints, how do they differ around the world, and then, as I said, some of my training tips. So what does the IOF competitions rules state? So the sprint profile is high speed, and I think that is kind of the key, at least in an international level. And it's to test the athlete's ability to read and translate the map into complex environments, and to plan and carry out route choices running at, again, the high speed. So the slight difference from forest is that courses must be planned so the element of speed is maintained throughout the full race, and that the controls should not be the challenge, but rather how you choose the best route to complete them. And it also requires an athlete's full concentration throughout the race. So what makes it a sprint map? So there is a different mapping standard for forest and for sprint maps. Sprint maps are at a 1 to 4,000 scale with 200 or 2-meter contours rather, and they have these incrossable features element to them, which is a very key point if you get into further sprints to remember. So I thought it would be fun to kind of look at the history of sprints. So from an international kind of perspective, the first one in the international calendar was at WOC 2001. It was at Finland's WOC was hosting, and it was a very forest eccentric sprint, quite a bit longer maybe than what we're used to seeing at the international level these days, and people were still very new into what this was. I've then included JWalk 2009 as that was my first JWalk, so my first experience into the international world of sprints, and you can kind of see it's now started to transition into more old towns, but also still having some of that kind of terrain aspect in between. And then WOC this year was held in Edinburgh, so about an hour from where I am based at the minute in Glasgow, and it was very town centre with lots of buildings. So it's nice to kind of see the progression, I think, of where international orienteering has come from. So a bit of history from the USA sprints. Thanks to John for the Sprint Champs map in 2007, which is kind of one of the first events we believe that was held in the US. And again, like at the World Champs, was a very forest orientated sprint. Probably also still a bit on the long side, but again, everyone was still learning what this discipline was. I included the US team trials in 2009 as this was one of the first events I really remember at Lehigh University. So again, kind of the steep sloped forested kind of area and then the campus feel. And then NAOC in last summer up in Tahoe, where we also saw the introduction of barriers, which was actually seen quite a bit in the last two World Championship races. So it's nice to see that kind of in the world level and at the US, we're all kind of following a similar trajectory on what sprints are like. So as I said, there's multiple sprint disciplines. So for World Champs at the minute, it is a sprint relay, and then also a knockout sprint. For the juniors, it is just the sprint and sprint relay. For all three of the disciplines, they are all, as IOF states it, the controls are technically easy. The terrain is predominantly very runnable park or urban. And the big piece here is that spectators are allowed along the full course and not just in kind of an arena. Your route choice is difficult, requiring high concentration, and they have started making this even more difficult with artificial barriers. And I think the key piece here is also that all of them are rather short winning times for the elites anyway. So they're 12 to 15 minutes, or in the knockout sprint, even shorter. So you do in the knockout a qualification race in the morning, and then there are multiple rounds where you get knocked out in the afternoon, and those knockout rounds are exceedingly fast. Everyone hopefully following along at that point. It's just as something fun. Yeah, so your sprint discipline standard kind of minute interval starts, so you're running more on your own. Sprint relay is made up of 4 runners, generally running in a female, male, male, female order. So this is Thomas running third leg at walk, handing off to myself as the anchor. That was a very fun relay where we started and ended indoors. So that was another fun challenge with an artificial barrier maze at the end that we had to navigate. And then the final picture is just showing the kind of head-to-head aspect of a knockout sprint. So this was me racing at the walk kind of test races. So what skills and techniques are important? So I thought it would be interesting to kind of look at the technical requirements in general for orienteering, and I thought the graph from the Swedish national team was very good at demonstrating the kind of difference in speed. So this is obviously your orienteering speed. It will fluctuate as you go in and out of controls. And then the red line is your maximum running speed. And your ability to kind of improve technically is obviously the difference between these two speeds. So it's very important to realize that there is a difference in these speeds, that you may not be able to orienteer at the same level running speed as your max kind of track running speed. And that's to be able to allow you to have your kind of map to reality interpretation, be able to route choice plan efficiently. You need to be able to plan ahead. You need to be good at visualizing your surroundings and then obviously avoiding mistakes. And as you kind of push that orienteering speed up towards your maximum running speed, you'll be incorporating all of these. So when we look at skills required for sprint orienteering, the questions here are kind of ones that many national teams have kind of been starting to have a look at and training towards. So a lot more importantly, it's where can I run? So we were talking about those uncrossable features. So that could be uncrossable walls, water features, and then the nice bit of artificial barriers that planners are liking to throw in. Then you kind of need to be able to look at which route is the shortest, but also which route is the easiest for me. And then this is where you also need to be able to have that balance of planning ahead to pick up kind of the traps, etc., that a planner might set for you, but also being able to orienteer in the moment and understand the decision making that you are taking at that point. And then you also need to be able to understand where the control is. So I've found, at least in sprint orienteering, the control descriptions I'm looking at a heck of a lot more than in forest, due to that uncrossable feature kind of piece. Is it an inside or an outside corner of a wall? Can I get around something? Really being able to see where or visualize where that control is tucked in is, I find, quite key. So if we kind of sum those things into three, it's your map interpretation. You need to be able to have a strong focus on map reading, and then it's the technical specifics of certain skills throughout the course that you might need. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in this presentation. The next thing I'm going to show, though, is a map. And I would like you in the chat to write the color, or sorry, have a look between control 2 and 3. I'm going to give you 6 seconds, and then I will show kind of routes, and I want you to put in the chat what color you think that might be. So if everyone's ready, your 6 seconds now. Quite a short amount of time, huh? So that has roughly been seen as kind of the amount of time the elites will be able to figure out that route choice. So in the chat, if people want to put blue, red, or green, we'll see what the consensus is. So bit of background. This was the route at the World Champ Sprint Final in Edinburgh. So Old Town, lots of buildings, and it was a medium-sized length between getting from control 1 to control 2. Okay, I have some blues, I have a red. It's nice to see most people have knocked out the green. It was quite varied on what people took, because some people didn't see kind of that barrier and the fact that that is an underpass that you couldn't get up and over. So I personally would be looking for the blue route. Although it's a lot of climb up to the Royal and back down, it's a fairly easily executed route. It's the shortest route, and it allows me to have a think about the kind of our next leg. So again, skills required for orienteering, I feel like that kind of amplifies the fact that you need to have almost kind of simpler orienteering. So simplification is quite a key skill. You need to understand the mapping standard and what the uncrossable features are. Route choice is important, so that full concentration through the whole race. To be able to have kind of that at quite a fast running pace, which also means that decisions are needed to be taken quickly. And then because of kind of that fast pace, I at least find that there's a bit more time pressure on you. So you need to also work on not getting distracted. Um, so how do sprints differ around the world? Um, from my experience, US maps seem to be a lot of campus and school areas, lots of parks, and lots of kind of the grid pattern urban areas, which is not surprising considering many of the cities are kind of a newer urban design. And there are a few barriers. They're starting to come, but they're not used by planners quite as much as seen in other areas. Um, I'm obviously training in the UK, so I thought it was quite interesting to see that difference from the US to the UK, and that was obviously where the World Champs was held this year. So we're also seeing a lot of campus areas and lots of like city parks, but we also have a lot of kind of these housing estate um, where it's kind of more irregular. We have some of the old towns. So this is Stirling, where they held Euro meeting last year. And we're starting to see more and more planners using barriers and some map flips. So as you can see, some of these courses are get quite crisscrossy. So we're using map flips to be able to use a smaller area. And how is that kind of different from European maps that I've run on? So they have a lot of old town areas. They're starting to look at multi-level areas and finding as many of them as possible. They really like their barriers and they like map flips. So from a barrier example, this was the World Cup in Switzerland this year. This was then the World Cup in Italy, so a little bit more of that kind of forest into old town piece. This was Walk in 2022. And then this was also the World Cup in Switzerland this year. And interestingly, it was this building through a lot of people. So in the first race, it was mapped as a building, as you'd see kind of grey. And then in the second race in the area, they surprised us with multi-level. And so it just completely looked like a new map. So some of my training tips. One of our favorite things over here to do is run sprint intervals. So basically sprint orienteering intervals. And basically the aim of this is to practice that fast decision making. So they're shorter efforts, kind of 3 to 5 minutes at a faster speed than you'd potentially be able to run kind of a full sprint or orienteering session. So that allows for more recovery time, which means you can train certain things more. It allows you to practice that higher concentration with less chances of getting distracted. You can practice certain techniques. So I know I don't particularly like long legs, especially with lots of barriers. So I practice that quite a bit through sprint intervals. And it also allows you to have that kind of talk with a coach or training buddy in between and tweak anything or feedback. So I quite like the ability to have that kind of quick feedback in sprint intervals. Another one that was really helpful was to run starts training. So basically you practice finding the start and you have to go fast from the get-go like you would in a race. So again, shorter efforts, it's kind of 2 to maybe 4 controls at a faster speed. Again, more training and you're not just getting kind of that one start of a course in your training session, you're getting multiple starts training. So that allows you to kind of practice turning over the map, finding where that start control is, and then practice kind of getting into the map and understanding the course planner's style as well as kind of the map. So an example of this is obviously starts here, and we've run 1 or 2 controls, and then that start triangle just moves ever so slightly, and you run a few more controls. You finish kind of here. and then your start would be very close again, and you'd run a few more controls and finish. So the way we've done this without kind of having someone at the finish is almost having like a flip book. So you have each of your intervals kind of stapled together. Don't look at them, run the first bit, take your pause or whatever. Then when you're ready to go, flip to the next page and go again. Another one that we've really found helpful, especially for the sprint relay, are mass starts. So you get to practice, again, finding where that start triangle is, but also dealing with forking or gaffling, depending on your terminology. So obviously when you are racing, not everyone will go to the same control, but as a team, you will run every option. So I find running these mass starts, and this is a selection of us, all ages, doesn't matter. It's buddies on a start list to practice those distractions on what other people might do at a start. Practice using others if you're that slightly bit further behind, and seeing where people are going and understanding, oh yeah, that is the right thing, or I am looking for kind of that piece. I also like doing mass starts because it normally means you've got multiple variations. So we've run kind of the one leg of a relay and then all swapped maps so that we would get a different variation to run in a second time. And it was also a good way of practicing control visualization, but without having loose control descriptions. As I find, as I said before, the control descriptions are quite important with a sprint, but on a relay, you won't have them on your kind of holder. So testing how you want to understand folding a map and thumbing along where you are, to then having it unfolded and checking codes or inside outside of things, take some practice. So mass starts are quite good for that one. And then another one is to adding complexity. So practice using the map given to you. This is a really, really big one in the fact that you can't make assumptions. So planners are now able to put in these artificial barriers or out of bounds areas. So you can't just rely on Google Maps / Street View anymore, because those assumptions could be wrong. So obviously on this map, there are a lot of barriers that we have added in for exactly that practice. Now, for this training session, we didn't put the barriers out. They are only on the map. So for training, that is perfectly fine. I've also had trainings where people have just put some flour down. Don't have to go and collect it. It's all good. But it does give you that visualization of, yes, I have hit that barrier. And again, it's practicing that kind of like forcing you to carefully plan ahead and not get trapped by planners. It also says you can use an area multiple times. So I saw in the chat when we first kind of joined that people have said, yeah, we do sprints, but in kind of the same areas. Try adding some barriers, try adding some different things. They actually even added at walk these kind of fake hedges to have the map even look less like a barrier. So you could even add some of that in. And then another thing is kind of that specific technical section. So practice what you find a challenge. So like I said, I struggled a little bit at the start with long legs with those barriers. Others have found the kind of like control picking or really short legs harder to deal with because it's that so much faster of a decision making. And if you practice what you find a challenge, you're hopefully avoiding mistakes, because practice makes perfect, right? So again, it allows this kind of focus on one skill. So this is an example from one of the Swedish team's trainings where they have decided certain sections of the course they are going to practice either really fine navigation so that they have to follow exactly that line, a control pick, so really fast decision making, or how do they simplify the map and not even look at kind of the inner pieces and just figure out what they're going to see on that simplified version. So also distractions. I know I needed to practice tuning people out, especially at kind of the World Champs, etc. There are spectators everywhere. So I know we are often used to, in the forest, being spectators kind of at a arena passage or the finish, sometimes the start, but in the sprint you can often start in the arena. And as I said, there will be people everywhere. So distractions to make sure that you are in the zone. So I've done this where my partner Ross follows me and is just an absolute nuisance, and I have to make sure that I can navigate fine while he's doing whatever behind me. I've also done it where I've listened to music and I've tried to remember or tried to have me finish and not remember what I was listening to. So if I hadn't remembered what the songs were playing, I've concentrated hard on my navigation. And then another one that I quite like to ask people to do is actually cheer for each other at events so that you can get used to hearing your friends' voices, or in my case, my parents, because they managed to distract me at the World Games, which was annoying. But now I'm used to having my dad kind of around a bit more. And I even had some of my friends who are not orienteers show up to the walk test races because I knew they were going to be at the World Champs. So just getting used to hearing people's voices that you maybe don't expect. And then a big piece now that teams are doing is armchair or as we call it, geeking. So although I said that you don't want to kind of rely on Google Street View, etc., you do want to understand the area that you'll be racing, because your overall knowledge of an area means that you can make faster decisions. It also allows for training without that physical load. So you can get more technical training in without having that physical running. And as I said, the knowledge of what the area looks like can be really, really key. So faster identification of key features. Some of the stuff we were looking at with the World Cup was these odd cave-like structures in the forest that we were like, right, they're going to use this. What does this look like? What might it look like on a map? Other pieces we've seen is like we could see on the old maps there were probably very distinctive churches on the maps in some of these old towns, or distinctive monuments in a park. What do those look like in reality, so that we can very quickly say, yep, I see this, I know where I am, and it just moves you through the terrain a little bit faster. And then also practice route planning on the area. So pretend you're the planner and plan yourself as many courses as you can using the different areas, sticking barriers in different places and figuring out what routes you want to actually take. So these are some of the things we've done. So Stag is my club here. We've taken some of the sprint races and just done the same kind of how long are things and what do we think are the best route, because sometimes it's not always the shortest. Then the UK team here has also done this. So this is Chris Jones. They were training at this point for the World Champs up in the Highlands of Scotland, and they had realised that they were running kind of this leg in 46 seconds. And in that time, there was 8 decisions. So they were trying to make 6 seconds, or it was 6 seconds per decision that they needed to make. So that was obviously quite a long route. You could have also taken kind of a route that had less decisions, but it had a lot of stairs, comparable distance, but it's kind of getting your head into the idea of what makes it a good route choice for you or not. And sometimes this armchair and seeing the meter numbers has been quite helpful for me anyway. So maps for training. Big push. Do not dismiss small areas. I know in the States people have said, oh, but we don't have access to. We are trying to find the teeniest of areas here in the UK. This is an example from Sweden. Like, you can do a lot with small areas by just tweaking the map, putting those artificial barriers on, etc. But also I would recommend to become a mapper. So as some of my prep for the World Champs this summer, I actually started to try and create a map of Leith, which is where the sprint qualification was, because there was not a map previously. Now, obviously, I couldn't go into Leith, so this was me doing this on kind of Google Maps and Street View and any other data points I could find online. Try mapping before that in the areas that you can actually go and see. So I think OUSA is doing a fantastic thing with the youth mapping program. So if you are wanting a bit more on mapping, I'm sure that group could help you out, because I'm definitely no expert, but I have definitely seen the benefits of trying to map, even if it's like an elementary school yard. And then I guess we also spoke quite a bit about physical fitness and the high speed. So I was training for kind of that 3.5 to 5K running distance. So my 5K time trial was quite key. I was also looking at changes of speed, steps and hills, especially for Edinburgh, was quite key. Changes of ground. So these were actually all within a weekend or so of each other. Quite different terrain. And therefore I was also looking at which shoes I wanted as something. So 3 different pairs of shoes there. And then also it's really important to look at your recovery and nutrition to make sure that you are keeping healthy for your physical fitness. So I just thought I would share a typical kind of weekly plan for me. But what I will say when this is my plan. You definitely need to listen to your body. I'm obviously not necessarily hitting everything that was on my plan because I was listening to my body. So make sure you understand what are the key sessions in your plan for you that are non-negotiables. So for me, I have to do physio and weight stuff to be able to keep injury free. And then I like to make sure I do at least one kind of session, so fast speed. And then because I've been training for sprints, my long runs were kind of not needing to be quite on the long side, or too much more than kind of an hour and a half or so. But yeah, listen to your body. So you now have heard me ramble on about sprints for way too long. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I'd like to know a little bit more about the barriers. How are they shown on the map? Are they, I mean, some places they look like solid purple lines, other places they look like different things.
Yeah, so let me try and get back to this. Sorry. Yeah, so on the map, if there's a physical barrier there, they will have that kind of purple line on them. But for example, for this one here, control 1, they will only have a physical barrier on that front edge. They will not have something here, but you are still not allowed to kind of go into that car park, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you said artificial hedges. So what was that all about?
Yeah, so I wish I had put in my slide deck a map of that. So basically, we had something similar to kind of that area of the map, but for like a full university kind of sports complex car park. And in order to not have the barriers be like bright red on the map to us, they instead decided to put barriers covered in green mesh, almost as if like army mesh, to blend in to the hedges and just connected up certain areas to make a bit of a maze. We were not expecting that, have to say.
Is a corn maze good practice for a sprint?
I would say yes, and I wish I had had a couple more corn mazes around. um, I think we're seeing kind of more maze-like places in areas that do not have multiple kind of route choices. So kind of more gritty areas. And I guess housing estates kind of similar to the one that's on the screen here. But yeah, corn mazes would probably be an excellent way of training for some of this. Just seeing the kind of slight maze that we got at the World Cup in Switzerland, and then the like circular maze that we got inside at Walk, plus the car park maze.
Do you have a favorite sprint you've run at, probably at a bigger meet? I don't know.
I have a few favorites for different reasons. The World Games sprint in Birmingham, Alabama was pretty cool. I think because it had us running in kind of that grid pattern. Actually, I've got it on my slide deck somewhere here. It had just a nice oops, there it is. That nice kind of bit of the grid pattern into a bit of park, some of the barriers, and then it was just a bit of fun to run around a baseball field, I have to say. Another one is probably the World Champs this summer. The sprint relay was on my old university campus, so it was pretty cool to go back and race there. But again, just being that a little bit head to head as well, so I do quite like a relay.
I kind of have a question. I'm trying to improve my ability to run and like read like smaller details and just reading in general while I'm running. And I do some runs with maps, just like looking at courses and thinking about how I'd go through them, but I don't feel like that helps that much.
So I feel like, yes, it does help me. But the bigger thing with detail, etc., is I have actually added a magnifier onto my compass in the last 2 years. And I know people are like, but it changes scale and stuff. No, just I would start practicing with a magnifier if that's something that you think will help that. Because, yeah, there's some detail that are just like, is that actually a gap or not? Fling the magnifier out, see if it is, even if you slow down for a second or two to do it. Because if you don't get stuck by a trap because you've spent the time to look, you'll probably save time. Does that kind of answer your question, Greta?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about how relays work? Because I've never actually done one.
Yeah,
Or
of
like
course.
for orienteering.
Yeah, so actually we'll use the same map that's on the screen. So start triangle, same as usual. And you have kind of big mass start. So in this case, all the women will line up. they will go run and run their course. And so when I said that there was kind of gaffling on stuff, you'll see that some of the lines go to kind of this control 39 and some go to 31, and then you'll come back in to 45. So you'll be kind of crisscrossing runners as you run your leg. So, but you'll run the same normal kind of sprint, and then at the finish, you'll tag over to teammate. So it's normally tap over a barrier, and then the guys will go and run. So they run two legs for a sprint relay, and then you will pass over to your last female runner to complete off the course. Does that help? I'm pretty sure this isn't all controls map. Christina might be able to help me, I think. But yeah, you basically run all the different courses in the same over your team.
If no one else is going to ask a question that would elicit it, could you go over what you told me about shoes people are wearing in an international sprint competition during the run through?
Yes. So as I said, I had the photo there of me wearing 3 different pairs of shoes. So I think as I can scroll through all these maps, they're quite different. There's either quite a bit of park, there's not. In that cases, we were running on kind of fabric. So there was a whole piece, especially after the World Cup races in Switzerland and Italy earlier this year, where they again had very different terrain, and everyone was looking at what pairs of shoes people had. And it was found that the top runners, if it was quite grassy or kind of more park area, we were finding a little bit more grip was quite useful. So in this photo, I'm wearing a pair of Mizunos. And they just have a little bit more grip to be able to deal with wet grass, a bit of slope, but still quite a racing flat shoe. However, I found for Edinburgh, they were appalling because they did really, really badly on wet cobbles. And in Italy, they did really, really badly on the kind of wet rock slabs that they were having in some of the kind of town centres and squares. So I actually then swapped over to a pair of Adidas, and these also were moving to carbon shoes at the elite level. So these were not fully carbon plated. They have carbon rods in them to allow for that kind of like faster feedback. But I wanted them more importantly because they have this really good, almost like car tire rubber. And so I was getting really, really good traction on kind of wet, slippy ground. And then obviously I was also wearing kind of a more pair of Adidas, no, Asics runners for kind of parky stuff, or longer urban events as well. So we do quite a bit of longer urban racing in the UK. But yeah, I now generally go to an event with 3 pairs of shoes. I'll wear my kind of Asics for warm up and cool down, and then decide on the day between weather and what I'm thinking what sections of the map we might take as to which pair of racing flats I'll use. Matthew?
Yeah, in the past, I've always heard people who were given advice on sprints to say, um, when you have the opportunity, try to read ahead. And I personally have never, ever been able to read ahead. I mean, like, when I say never, ever, I mean, like, one leg out of 20 or something like that, like less than once an event. Um, especially with the way they are now, it's like I flash read the leg. I read my route choice as quickly as I can, and I do it. And when I get to the next one, I look at the leg again. I'm not able to focus on anything outside the leg I'm doing. What do you hear the elites talking about reading ahead or looking outside the leg you're on?
Again, needs to be done in like quite a controlled manner. Practice it, because the last thing you want to do is create yourself a mistake from looking ahead. But I think that's where we've done a lot of work on kind of simplification. And one of my favorite phrases that Murray Strain, one of the GB coaches, uses is, can I put my hand on the wall and run along a line feature and get to control? And if I'm doing that, I should be able to look ahead because my hand is basically running along a wall. So at this point, I would be starting to kind of try and read ahead if I took that green route from about here. I've seen where I need to go into, and that whole time would be thinking, okay, are there any traps in that next leg, and how am I leaving that control? So there are probably places on a few things like that, but yeah, I've liked, again, kind of my hand is on the wall. It was kind of a nice trigger that Murray Strains used for that.
Thank you.
Does that help? John?
Are there elite orienteers internationally, or coaches, or people who have really good Instagram accounts or blogs that you would recommend people follow if they want to be up on the see what's happening on the cutting edge of sprint orienteering?
Yeah, so Ralph Street from the GB team has quite a big presence on social media. There are also quite a few orienteering podcasts that have come out. No, you're gonna challenge me on what they are. But Ralph Street, and it's called the Orienteer Pod, and they generally do kind of a recap of the elite level events that have happened, and then also kind of a preview of certain things. But it's really good because it also has Tim Robertson from New Zealand on it, and this is going to be really bad. Magnus, so one of the Scandinavian races. They're probably the best that come to mind quickly, but I will think of some others and we can send some out.
Yeah, we can put them in the comments after the video when we put it on YouTube. Thank you.
Yeah. And yes, Tori has answered a question in the chat. Where can a magnifying lens for a thumb compass be purchased? Yes, often vendors will have them as accessories. So, do I have mine here? No, mine, I have a silver thumb compass, and it does just kind of loop in to my thumb holder, and has quite a nice sturdy base. I've broken quite a few of the Moscow ones. So if you have a way to stay away from the just post, like a singular, it literally looks like a post, magnifiers, and get something that has a little bit more structure to it, I recommend. It also means that if I want to take my magnifier off, etc., in between races or when I'm storing my compass, I don't need a special tool, which I needed for the post. So that would maybe be the only tip I've learned through doing some of that. But yes, don't be afraid to try the magnifier, but I would try it in a training run or one that you are not like a focus race for you, because it does take a little bit of practice to move in and out, and then obviously you're seeing a different scale as well. So it could potentially throw out your distance estimation without a bit of practice.
As you've done like mapping for sprint venues, is there anything super important you think you've learned from like mapping a location that you can't learn when you're orienteering?
I think for me, it's more understanding that there could be multiple ways that one area could be mapped. And I think that's particularly true around kind of some of this kind of park vegetation or garden areas in how many trees do people want to map or how simplified do they want to do it. I think also in the UK, it was understanding if they're going to put kind of all of the different fences in between some of the buildings, or are they just going to make it all olive green for simplification? So it was more understanding how I would maybe interpret the ground onto a map and understanding how the symbols could be slightly interpreted differently depending on who's mapping. But I haven't done a ton of mapping, I will say that. But it did help. But if you don't want to take on mapping straight away, I would say getting Purple Pen or some other course planning software, or even printing stuff out on paper and red pen. Practice creating courses and thinking about those traps or thinking about what makes an interesting leg on that area. And what's maybe kind of what I would have said 5 to 6 is maybe kind of a transition leg. It's quite short, but it's making you kind of break up thinking about some of the longer decisions. Yeah, so what is the point of the control, basically? Any other questions?
I have another question, kind of related to like the shoe question. But do you have a favorite type of pants you like to run with? Like, I know some people prefer like the running shorts, or some people prefer the bike short style. I don't know.
You'll probably notice, so I've also only put photos of me in the presentation because I didn't ask others for their permission. But yeah, you'll probably realize I quite like the spandex shorts piece. The longer, the better normally. Just so they don't ride up and chafe and whatever else. But whatever kind of makes me feel speedy and confident is what I like. So yeah. I don't think there's a kind of this is the right answer. I know No Name, I think, has also changed their style of shorts slightly. So yeah, there's one pair that I just won't wear because I don't feel confident in them.
Well, I want to thank you, Alison. I think that was an excellent presentation. Does anyone else have any questions before we sign off?
I'm curious, how much do you rely on the scale on your compass, or do you judge distances by eye more than actually measuring them?
I will say I am my father's daughter, and he taught me very well on how to judge things kind of by feel. I do know my pace count in case I do need it. But I think also in sprints, I've probably used that a lot less than in forest, just because there are so many decision points. The other thing, and this is quite faint, but the other thing I'll probably use more is if I'm running along kind of something to look at both sides of the road. So if I'm trying to find a kind of smaller path and it's maybe 3 along, but there's only 1 on the other side, I'm looking for the one on the other side to help me judge the one that I want. Does that answer your question, John?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Right. Anything else for anyone?
Okay, well,
Right.
thank you very much.
If not, I might go to bed. It's 2:30 in the morning here.
2:30 for you. Okay.
Later than the call of duty. Thank you.
Right.
No
It really-
problemo.
Really was great. We had a nice turnout too. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me chat about sprints, and thank you to the juniors for bringing this up.
Thank you so much for putting all the information together. It was really helpful.
You
And
are very welcome.
thanks
Anything
for
to help.
staying up probably an extra 3 or 4 hours to talk
Hey,
to us.
it's important. Junior development is very important. So I'm just glad everyone else has managed to benefit from your guys' very insightful questions. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
see you all.
Good night, Allison.